Well, good morning and welcome to the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan's live stream broadcast of a conversation with the Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to the U.S., His Excellency André Haspels. It's in partnership with the Netherland-America Foundation. I'm Michael Van Denen. I am the Executive Director of the Council. On behalf of my colleagues, Erica Kubik and Emily Smith, and the Board of Directors of the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan, I welcome all of you. Thank you for adjusting with us as we program responsibly in this time of COVID-19. And we hope that you will stay safe and you will show grace to those in your community. The Council's mission is to empower the people and organizations of West Michigan to engage thoughtfully with the world. We do this with the support of over 50 local companies and 11 educational partners and community members. Together, we seek to provide a program that is credible, objective, relevant, civil, and compelling. To change the world, we believe, you first have to know the world. You can learn more about what we do at worldmichigan.org. We're partnering on this event with the Netherland-American Foundation, the NAF. And to tell us a little bit more about the NAF and about how you can become involved in its programs, I welcome Mr. Bob Ottenhoff, a member of NAF's Washington, D.C. Leadership Committee. Bob, welcome.
Thanks, Michael, and hello to all of you. Although we may be apart, it's so nice for all of us to be together for this special event. The Netherland-America Foundation, or NAF, is now nearly 100 years old. We were founded in 1921 by two prominent Dutch Americans, Franklin Roosevelt and Edward Bok from the Ladies' Home Journal. And our purpose is a simple one, but profound: to further strengthen the bonds between our two countries through exchanges in the arts, sciences, education, business, and public affairs. Now, we have 9 chapters throughout the country. Michael mentioned I'm a member of the Washington, D.C. chapter, but we have chapters all the way from Boston in the Northeast down to Southern California, wherever there are prominent Dutch American communities. And today, of course, we're so grateful to be partnering with the West Michigan chapter. So what does NAF do? Well, our focus is on education, culture, government relations, social events. Over the last few years, we've sponsored NAF Fulbright fellowships, interest-free student loans, internship programs. In my chapter in Washington, for example, we have interns who work on various organizations on Capitol Hill and around the Capital District. We have a global health internship fund. We provide cultural grants. We provide donor advised program partnerships with over 30 Dutch nonprofit organizations. And then throughout the year, we'll offer a variety of business, cultural, and social networking events. And one of the things that makes the chapter so interesting, and each one has its own interests, its own special areas of expertise. And so every chapter is a little bit different, but we're offering all kinds of networking events throughout the year. We started last year to put a particular emphasis on the West Michigan chapter because of so many Dutch Americans living in Western Michigan. In April of last year, the then ambassador, Ambassador Schuer, visited the Michigan area, and we partnered there with the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan. You can see on this next slide a picture of where we were. We visited with the Dutch Caucus of the Michigan State House. We met with political science majors and Dutch language majors at Calvin College, and went on a tour of the West Michigan Aviation Academy. If you are interested in joining the West Michigan NAF or learning more about NAF in general, you'll see at the bottom of this slide here, membership at the NAF.org. Membership at the NAF.org is a way for you to get involved with the West Michigan chapter of NAF. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that very much. And we're grateful to partner with ANAF on this. They've been very helpful in putting this program together. We're pleased to have Ambassador Haspels with us, and we are grateful to him for his flexibility to engage us in this format. After Ambassador Haspels' opening remarks, there'll be ample time for questions. You may type them into the YouTube comments section, or you can text them to 616-308-6560. Please exhibit civility to our guests and hospitality to others by asking respectful and succinct questions. André Haspels was born in Eindhoven and is the ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to the United States, based in Washington, D.C. He studied political science and international relations at the Free University in Amsterdam. In 1987, he joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where he served in many capacities. In 1997, he became head of the political department at the embassy in South Africa in Pretoria, where he was involved in the cooperation between the two nations, among others in the setup of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He later served as the Dutch ambassador in Vietnam and in South Africa, and most recently, the Director General of Political Affairs in The Hague. Ambassador Haspels, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your time. We hope that you and your family and colleagues are safe and well during these unusual times. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Michael, for this introduction and for receiving me. Thank you very much, Bob, for your introduction, and thanks to the World Affairs Council and to the NAF for organizing this virtual introduction for me. I would also like to introduce, before I start, our Honorary Consul in Grand Rapids, Paul Heulen, who is joining us, as well as Tyron Peter, who is our Senior Economic Counselor at our Consulate General in Chicago. So again, thank you very much for organizing this. Of course, it's second best, let's be honest. I had in my agenda the plan to visit Michigan and Grand Rapids somewhere in April, May. I wanted to do that in my first year because I've heard many good things about Michigan, about the area. And not only that, we have more than 500,000 people from Dutch descent living there. Not only because the king has visited you in 2015, not only because Henne told me that the Tulip Festival in spring is something that I should absolutely visit. Not only because there are many Dutch companies active, big companies, smaller companies in the area, but also mainly to meet with quite a few people who have been very active in shaping our bilateral relationship. And the thing is, I'm not going to mention them all because then there's also always the risk that you forget somebody. But I promise that if I have the time and if I'm allowed to travel again and hopefully the pandemic will ease, that I am looking forward to meeting you all. And meeting you in person and discuss much more in detail about our bilateral relationship. So that's what I wanted to say by matter of kickoff. I would also like to say, before we go to the slides, because we have prepared a few slides for my introduction, mainly two things when we talk about the current situation. First, I would like to say that I would like you already said, Michael, to express my sympathy with all of you, the people in Michigan, my sympathy in these difficult times. We are in a pandemic, we are battling the coronavirus, and we are coping with the socio-economic impact. And I know every state in the United States is affected. West Michigan is affected, the Netherlands is affected, actually all European countries, but actually almost every country in the world is affected. So that's something that we share. I hope we will be able to quickly flatten the curve, not only for the social reasons and health reasons, but also for economic reasons, of course. Let me state, and I would like to wish all those people, the families who have lost loved ones in this pandemic, my condolences, and wish them a lot of success in the follow-up. And I would also like to say that there is a strong economic impact as well. And one example that has been mentioned is Vol, a Dutch company that was supposed to start its factory in the area has decided to delay that because of the crisis. So it has socio-economic impact, and I hope we will be quickly able to deal with that. The other thing that I would like to say when we deal with the actual situation, apart from the pandemic, is of course what's going on in the United States, but also outside the United States. And that is the current debate on discrimination, on racism, on human rights. And I would like just to echo here what my Prime Minister and our Foreign Minister have said in the Netherlands as a comment. And our Prime Minister said last week in his statement that, of course, the death of George Floyd is unacceptable. But he also said that in the Netherlands, we have to deal with exclusion and with racism, because there people are also sometimes judged not on their future, but on their past. People are also sometimes seen not as an individual, but as a group. And people are also not being assessed on their behavior, but on their faith or their religion. And I think that's something we should all address, these issues. It's not something uniquely for the United States, it's something that we have to tackle. And of course, the developments in the United States are worrisome, but at the same time, we have trust that the institutions, the mechanisms, the instruments are there to deal with these issues. And as you know, the Netherlands support human rights issues worldwide, whether it's about freedom of expression, freedom of demonstration, freedom of speech, and the broader human rights agenda. So that's something that we continue to share. Those things, Michael, I would like to say from the start as a kind of kickoff. So if everybody's ready, I'm happy to go over to my slides and say something about the individual slides. There we go. The first slide, that's me and my wife, Bernie, after we just presented our credentials to President Trump in September in the White House. Presenting your credentials is always done in combination with a letter of withdrawal from your predecessor. It's a letter signed by, in this case, the King of the Netherlands, and handed over to the head of state here, and asking President Trump to accept me as actually the special envoy of the King, as ambassador. And here we are very proud after the ceremony to be in front of the White House. To be honest, at that time, as you can see, it was more quiet and there was not as much protection and gates as there are at the moment. I'm married to Bernie, my wife. We have 4 children. 3 of them are studying and working in the Netherlands. And we miss them, of course, because they are not allowed to travel to the United States because of the travel ban. So we do a lot of Zoom meetings in the weekends as well. My youngest son is here with me, Alec, who goes to the British International School in Washington. The next slide says something about the Netherlands Karelian. There we go. First of all, I would like to thank all those people who have contributed to making the renovation of the Karelian possible. As you know, the Karelian is based in Arlington. Beautiful place, especially if you are on top of the Karelian, you have a wonderful view. The Karelian was donated by the Dutch people to the American people after the Second World War as a token of our appreciation, not only for what the American side has done for us during the Second World War, but also afterwards in the Marshall Plan and helping us to also social economic recover again after the Second World War. It's being renovated, as I said, at the moment in the Netherlands at the Koninklijke IJsbouws, who is a specialized company who can renovate all the bells during following a very special procedure. They're the experts. The pictures that you see are, let's say, the start of the renovation, and the bells are taken off. And then I was lucky enough to visit, when I was in the Netherlands in January, the factory of Koninklijke IJsbouws in Asperen in Brabant. It is important to mention also that the Karelian will not only be renovated, but it will also be expanded with 3 new bells. smaller bells, which gives then the status of the Karelian, the special status of Grand Karelian, because it will then be altogether 53 bells. And we hope that we will be able in the first half of next year, at the latest, to have the bells back to the to Arlington, and that you will then be able, if you visit the Karelian, to hear the familiar sound of the Karelian. The 3 bells are named after 3 prominent Americans who have played an important role. Eleanor Roosevelt, of course, General Marshall, I mentioned the Marshall Plan already, and Martin Luther King. The other bells, as they were already there, have been named either to Dutch provinces or to specific professions. Also older professions like millers, fishermen, handicraft men and women. So every bell has either a name or a profession, and we thought it appropriate to mention 3 prominent Americans for the 3 bells that are added to the Karelian. The next slide, and then I'll go to my computer as well. But I think I recognize it because this is André Kuipers, as you know. He is a Dutch astronaut. And he gave, as you can see, a presentation at the embassy. Space technology is one of the areas where we would like to cooperate with. I think we have in specific areas some added value. Of course, the United States, NASA, other companies are very strong brands and have a lot of expertise and professionalism. But we were very honored to have the visit of André Kuipers in October this year. And then we always combine it, not only the contribution in this case to a trade mission and a big event that was organized here in Washington, but we also try then to organize a lecture. And of course, what is very important, try to stimulate the younger generation, the future generation, to become active as well in areas such as space and space development. The next slide is also an important sector where we are active in, and that's agriculture. Some of you might know this person. This is Simon Groot. Simon Groot received the World Food Prize, actually the Nobel Prize for Agriculture, if you may call it like that, last year in Iowa, in Des Moines. He is well known, Simon Groot. He has established many companies, but he's very active in developing new seeds, seeds that are more resistant to diseases, seeds that are more environmental friendly, and not only developing a new brand and a stronger brand of seed, but also to allow these seeds to be bought by farmers in poorer countries, be it in Asia, be it in Africa. So I was very fortunate to meet with Simon Groot there, also because agriculture, as most of you know, I guess, is one of the areas where we have a strong cooperation with the United States. Not only through our investments and our technical support, but also through our exports, and of course through our famous University of Wageningen, who has a lot of cooperation with universities here in the United States. The next picture is me standing in front of between the 2 co-chairs of the Dutch Caucus here on the Hill, Mr. Huizinga and Mr. Kilmer. This was in my first introduction in the House. We're very fortunate to have a Dutch caucus on the Hill, like we have a Netherlands, a US Friendship Committee, a parliamentary committee on the Dutch side, so their counterpart, so to speak. I think it is important for us to not only develop a relationship with the government and with the ministries and the departments, but also with, for instance, members of parliament, of the House, of Congress, with the states, of course, and the governors. So always when I visit the state, I will try to meet with the governor and the staff. It's important to reach out to, as I mentioned, universities, companies, local politicians, because the United States is much more than Washington, is much more than cooperating with the federal level. But in this case, I think I was very happy to meet with two members of the Dutch caucus here on the Hill. And we have been in contact during this pandemic via Zoom. Also there we try to maintain our contact because that's important. The next slide says something about the visit of our honorary consuls. We have quite a few of them. As you might know, we have consulate generals. We have 5. Tyron is joining us from Chicago, but we also have consulate generals in San Francisco, in Miami, in Atlanta, and in New York. But apart from that, we also have honorary consuls. And these are people like Paul Heulen, who is joining us, who are our honorary consuls. They are representing the Netherlands and helping us mainly with regard to economic issues and more consular issues. It's quite a broad network. In every state, we almost have an honorary consul. They are very important for us. They are not only our eyes and our ears, but they also are representing the Netherlands. And we're very grateful for them doing that, because to be honest, it's more a job which is an honorable job than a job where you earn a lot of money. You don't earn a lot of money, you earn a small amount of money, but you mainly do it because I hope you love, in this case, the Netherlands, and we are very, very grateful for that. It's a large group. We visited the Kennedy Center, as you can, well, you cannot see it probably, but there is a Dutch company, Sempergreen, who is specialized in making roofs, green roofs, so to speak. This is a very environmental friendly way of dealing with construction and building. And by making the roofs greener, you can make specific arrangements with water and holding the water, and also make it much more greener than normal buildings are. You see it more and more now also in bigger cities, in big buildings. And Sempergreen is one of the Dutch companies who is very innovative on that. So we try to combine our visit that we have twice a year of our honorary consuls to Washington, always with economy and working together in important sectors. A big group. Some of you, well, I hope at least you all recognize the logo. That's our new Netherlands logo in a familiar color, as you see. So we're not talking about Holland anymore. It should be, although I understand that most of you are familiar with the name Holland, but as most of you know, Holland actually refers to 2 provinces of the Netherlands, North and South Holland. So we use the logo, the Netherlands, and you might be able not only to recognize the orange part, but also a kind of a flower in between. Mona Keizer is our State Secretary for Economic Affairs. She was visiting us last year. She went to a big conference in Las Vegas. And afterwards, we flew to a high-tech conference with many Dutch participants as well, in a big Dutch pavilion. And afterwards, we flew to Los Angeles, where we opened a Netherlands Business Support Office, an NBSO. These are, apart from our honorary consuls and our consulate generals and the embassy in Washington, specific locations where we have a limited staff, 1 or 2 people. In Los Angeles, in this case, 1 person, who helps us with making business links, looks into business possibilities, maintains a network, and well, helps us together with, in this case, the CG in San Francisco to organize events. So we were very grateful for Mona Keizer to visit the United States and to open the NBSO. Unfortunately, this was only one of the last visits that we had before the outbreak of the pandemic. She was supposed to come every year, so it will depend a little bit on whether we manage to flatten the curve if we see Mona again this year here in the United States. We hope so. The next picture is a picture where I'm visiting together with our Consul General in Miami, who is standing second from the right. And next to me, the lady in dark, is our counselor for Aruba. working here at the embassy, I visited our Caribbean part of the kingdom. So in this case, Aruba, which you will see here, and then afterwards we went to Curaçao. It is important to realize that Aruba, Curaçao, and Sint Maarten are part of our kingdom, and that we are responsible for the foreign relations of the parts of the kingdom. That's not managed by the governments in either Aruba or Curaçao. That's a part of a task of the Kingdom of the Netherlands as a whole. So that's why we are often in contact with State Department here, whether it's about Venezuela, whether it's about migration, whether it's about repatriation, or anything else that is more has a foreign aspect. The forward operating locations, for instance, bases, army bases from the United States on our islands. That's done by us, by the embassy. But it is important for me to know what's going on the islands. Of course, they're also heavily affected by the pandemic. Both Curaçao and Aruba have as main source of income tourists and the visit of cruise ships mainly, and by planes, but especially the cruise ships, as you might have seen, and we've been very busy with that, especially, by the way, our Consul General in Miami, in the beginning of the crisis, to repatriate Dutch passengers who were stuck at cruise ships, and later on the staff of the cruise ships to bring them back to their countries, including the Netherlands. So this is a visit of me paying a visit to Aruba with the Prime Minister, Madam Wever Cruz, who's a very strong leader, and they have problems because of a lack of income of the tourism sector. Luckily, they managed to flatten the curve there as well, and the 1st of June, they gradually opened for tourism, because tourism is, as I mentioned, a lifeline for them in the islands. Then I think the next picture is about an event that we organized at the embassy on Black liberators. This is a study that we've done together with universities in the Netherlands from our defense department, but also from broader, our political and our cultural department, to look at what we say Black liberators. Most of you might know the cemetery of Margraten, where also this year, on the 4th of May, we had a ceremony, the 5th of May, I should say, a ceremony by the King, and the American ambassador Pete Hoekstra also joined the King to pay tribute to those fallen soldiers who are buried at Margraten. And most of them are now known in terms of where they came from, what their families are, but there are still quite a few who are buried at Margraten without knowing their families, their relatives. And the graves of Margraten are being maintained by the citizens of Margraten, which is a small village in the southern part of the Netherlands, in Limburg. But this study on the Black liberators helped to manage and find family relatives here back in the United States, and trace them back of quite a few people, Black people who were buried there, Afro-Americans, and who until recently were not identified and not known. So this is important for us, as it is for the American side. It's part also of our broader outreach that we want to do to the Afro-American society. And I'm very proud that we managed to do this project, finance it a little bit, but mainly did the research part. The next picture, I think we have 13 in total, and we're coming up to number 10 here. Yeah, these were different times for the KLM, because we signed here together with Microsoft a sustainable aviation agreement, where they would work together on making airlines more sustainable, but especially we celebrated the fact that KLM had its 100th birthday. You can still see it. Yeah, you can see it on the screen at the back in the well-known blue colors. So it's 100th anniversary. Very impressive. Royal Dutch Airlines. As you know, they've merged with Air France. So it's now KLM Air France. But we had all over the world the celebrations of 100-year KLM. At the outbreak of the pandemic, many airlines were affected, of course, because of travel bans. Cargo continues to go up and down, but also to a lesser extent, but is still much more, of course, than passengers. And well, as you might know, KLM also had to reduce its flight schedule to the United States. They've continued flying also during the pandemic to New York on a daily basis, and to some other cities as well, Chicago, Atlanta, Los Angeles. And they now gradually and slowly pick up from next month onward. They will also twice a week, very slowly, for instance, restart their flight on Washington. But they're very much dependent on the travel ban. As you also know, all governments support their airlines, and the Dutch government financially, the Dutch government does the same. And I hope they will be able to come out of this crisis. But there are many challenges for the airline industry on how to deal with, for instance, the 1.5 meter distance protocol. So this was KLM, an important Dutch company. We also celebrated during the pandemic Remembrance Day, the 4th of May. You might have seen the impressive ceremony on Dam Square in the Netherlands, where our king held a speech. Every year we also have a small ceremony at the embassy. And as you understand, normally there will be more people present, but also here we had to do the ceremony according to the protocol. But we find it important, especially in the year where we celebrate 75 years of commemoration, the end of the World War. We are grateful for the American side, as I mentioned earlier, with the Karelian, for the role that they've played. So we thought it important to organize this ceremony as well on an adapted form. So this was Remembrance Day. And then, of course, apart from Remembrance Day, we also have King's Day, which could also not be organized as we were supposed to do it, by organizing a big party, inviting our network, and well, being dressed in orange. So we had to do that via Zoom and celebrate the birthday of our king on the 27th of April. A unique experience, and I'm very happy that we managed to do this, but I must honestly say I really hope that next year we will be able to celebrate King's Day again as we are supposed to do it, with a party, with meeting our network, and with being outside again. But as you can see, this was an alternative for this year, and also people managed to wear a lot of orange. All right, and then the last picture that I would like to show you is a picture of Mr. Walt van Praag. He was well, he did many things, but one of the things he did was founding the organization for unrepresented nations and people, the UNPO, the organization which was established in the 70s and which represented nations or people that are not represented in the United Nations. Uyghurs are an example for that, a big group in China, as you know. Krim Tatars is another example of that. Palestinians is another example. So he did a lot of work for representation of people and groups that are not being represented in the United Nations in New York. I was happy enough to inform him that he would receive a special royal decoration. Normally, again, we would have done it live, so we would have organized something. He's living in close to San Francisco. We would have organized something, and by way of surprise, we would have handed over the royal decoration. But we now had to do it differently. I called him from my home in Washington, as you can see. and the dog Baloo is quietly listening what I'm saying there. And I was congratulating Mr. van Praag with his royal decoration. Okay, that's actually what I wanted to say as a way of introduction about myself, about my family, about my work, and about my first year. Michael, back to you. I'm happy to give any answers to questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Ambassador. That was a marvelous introduction to you, to your family, to your country, and the way that our nations have such a close relationship and work together so well. Appreciate that very much. We will have questions from our YouTube audience. And again, you can put them in the YouTube chat column and we will see them and we'll ask them for you. Or you can dial 616-308-6560. And that's a way to get your question in front of us as well. Ambassador, thank you for your kind words of condolence to those in the US who've been affected by COVID-19. And I wonder, how is the Netherlands faring with the virus? What has been that country's experience, your country's experience, and how is mitigation going? How is the fight against the virus going in the Netherlands?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking the question, Michael. I think we were in the second group of countries, so to speak, because as you know, it came from Asia and then to Europe and then later on to the United States. I think we have tried to take strict measures from the beginning, like many countries do, with a kind of stay-at-home policy, with taking all the necessary hygienic measures, with closing the schools and things like that. But also in the beginning, we had quite a huge spike of not only people who had to be admitted to hospital, but also death. We have, because of a very strict policy, managed to, as I mentioned earlier, flatten the curve. But then, of course, came the challenge to gradually open society, while at the same time ensuring that the curve would not only remain flat, but would go further down, very close to zero death. I think zero death is impossible in terms of pandemic, but to a very, very low level. So we have now entered phase one, where we gradually opened up our society. A few things are possible. Meetings of 10 persons are allowed. You are allowed to go to a restaurant, but with all the distances. Some, like cinemas, are open, but to a very limited number of persons, with maintaining the 1.5 meter distance. Other things are not allowed yet, like we have not resumed our soccer competition, for instance, like other European countries did that, but we decided to close it for the season and start in August again. So I think I'm for now relatively optimistic, but we should be very, very careful again, and we realize that. You might have seen that then there are a lot of discussions also if there are big demonstrations against racism, like in Amsterdam. There is immediately the discussion between finding the right balance between the health measures that we have taken and the prevention measures, and at the same time ensuring the right of freedom of expression and freedom of demonstration. I think that's a discussion that you have in a democracy. But for the time being, we're doing relatively well, but we remain very cautious.
Yeah, we wish the best for the people of the Netherlands too. This is a very big challenge, and as you mentioned earlier, the whole world engaged in it. You talked a little bit about the demonstrations in the U.S., and you mentioned that there are racism demonstrations in the Netherlands as well. You have a very unique perspective on this. You served in South Africa doing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And are there things that you noticed from that very unique experience that you take with you as you observe what's going on in the U.S., in the Netherlands, and around the world as we confront this pernicious problem of racism?
Yeah, well, as the name already says, Truth and Reconciliation has two different components. And South Africa, of course, came from an apartheid regime And the first thing that was very important was the truth aspect. And that means that people were allowed to say what they experienced. And everybody had to listen to their stories, because I think it's not only about telling what you experience, but it's also important that you are being heard, that people listen to you. So I think this was a very important part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was led by Bishop Tutu, who is a very respectable man. President Mandela, of course, was also very much in favor of the TRC. So I think that helped South Africa a little bit by facing its past and starting a discussion about injustice, about racism, and how to repair that. And for the reconciliation part, is much more difficult. That I think that part also in South Africa was not as successful as the truth part, because for there was also things about compensation, financial compensation, or through other ways. And I think that was more complicated. But what I learned from South Africa, that's important that people have the opportunity to speak and that people are being heard. And if those two things happen, then you at least have a debate which you can take further. And I think that's the most important thing, that people are being heard, that they have the freedom to speak, that they are listened to, and that you can then take the next steps.
Thank you for that. Yeah, fascinating. Thank you. Good, important words. A listener is asking about representation from consulates in the U.S. He happens to be from Oklahoma, listening in. Wondered who might be the consul in that area, and if you aren't expected to have that at your fingertips right now, but we can get back to that listener and ask. But wondering how consulates function in general. What is the mandate that you give to the consulates across the country, and how do they reach out regionally? Even if there's not a consulate in the city or nearby, how does one in a state that doesn't have a consulate, how do they reach out beyond the city that they're in?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, we have 5 CGs, consul generals, and they cover all of the United States. So every state is covered by a CG. But for instance, and Tyron knows better, but I think the consulate of Chicago covers, I think, 11 states. And I think Oklahoma also falls on Chicago, but I'm not quite sure, and we can find that out. Their main functions are consular and economic. But a lot of things have changed in the consular world. And as some of you might know, the last couple of years, we've started to work much more with what we call external service providers. These are companies where you can go to if you need, if you need a visum for the Netherlands or for somewhere else, and they provide you the service. So the front office is not anymore at the embassy or at the consulate general, but is somewhere else, is at this external service provider. And for instance, for extending your passport, which is now valid for 10 years, this can also be done. It can be done at the embassy or the CG, but it can also be done, for instance, if you visit the Netherlands. There is a desk at Schiphol Airport where you can do that. And the future is that you should also be able to do that electronically completely. So that means that the role of the CG has gradually moved away from the consular part, but it's still important, because you should also think of supporting Dutch tourists who are in trouble, like we had with the crisis. We have Dutch prisoners who are looked after by our consulate generals. There are still some technical administrative things that they do, for instance, like approving a Dutch diploma for a certificate for a specific university or something. But that has become smaller overall. So the main function of the consul generals are now economic, helping us with organizing trade missions, looking after trade possibilities in their area, supporting Dutch companies if necessary. So they have become much more, an economic mission than a consular mission. They work under the embassy in Washington, and we meet with them virtually on a weekly basis. And some of them most of them have 1 or 2 or 3, let's say, expat staff from the Netherlands, but the majority of the staff working there are its local staff members.
Thank you. Appreciate that. A question came in from a texter. You read in yesterday's Guardian that the British universities have seen lower rankings since the vote in favor of Brexit. What effect will Brexit have on the economy and the universities in the Netherlands? What have you been noticing since that vote? And I know there's a lot of negotiation still going on, right? And probably was delayed some with the virus, but how is that conversation handling post-Brexit going in the Netherlands?
Yeah, well, as you know, from the beginning, we've said that we were very much in favor of having the United Kingdom in the EU and not outside. But we also said that the vote should be respected. So after then, negotiations have started. There was a very complicated process in the UK itself as well, of course, which we've all been able to follow, which in the end led to a new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who said that he would like to come to an agreement with the EU within a year. Well, those negotiations are taking place now. It's done by the EU side by Mr. Barnier, who is representing all the EU countries. So the Netherlands is not participating as an individual country, but the Netherlands has approved the mandate that Mr. Barnier has received for these negotiations. I think for us, it's a mixed bag. On the one hand, the United Kingdom is still very much important for us in terms of our economy, but also fishing, for instance, and the fishing sector, but also in the military field. We do a lot of military cooperation, defense cooperation. The UK is one of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations. We do a lot of work together with them on intelligence. So they are a very important partner for us. And we hope those things can be continued also in the new phase. But the mixed bag is also that we have seen that some companies have left the UK, some agencies, for instance, like the European Medicine Agency, the EMA, who is now based in Amsterdam. They were based in London. Other companies that are looking for a European place to settle instead of London or somewhere else in the UK. So I think that there we have had some benefit. So it will very much depend on how the trade agreement will look like between the EU and the UK to see what the end result is. Personally, I think it is important to find the right balance. They cannot be a full-fledged member anymore. But at the same time, that also means that they cannot have, let's say, 100% benefit from the internal market without paying, your contribution. So you cannot leave a club and then say, okay, but I still want to be a member and have all the privileges without paying your membership. So I think that is where we are at the moment. Again, we have now accepted the fact that they are leaving, and we are looking for a very fruitful and strong cooperation with the UK also in their new capacity. We will. I think it is important to see what the UK will do now in terms of recovery. As you see, there are a lot of arrangements being made within the EU now, geographically, the UK is also is Europe, is our continent. But if you discuss on the Schengen area, for instance, and you make arrangements about gradually opening up, the UK has a slightly different position now. So we'll have to follow that closely. There will also be, last remark on that issue, it will be very important to see what kind of trade deal will be struck between the UK and the US, because that could set the tone as well. President Trump has promised that it will be a great trade deal between these two countries. We'll see how that works out.
A related question about the economy. So obviously the Netherlands, like the entire world, has had their economy buffeted by COVID. So many effects across the economic landscape. How is the country faring with its economic health and strength? Are there certain industries that are taking the lead, some that are less affected by others? How is the government supporting the businesses getting back on their feet or thriving? How's the economic process going?
Yeah, well, as a relatively small country, we are very much dependent on the outside world, on the world economy. That's why we invest, for instance, in multilateral institutions, also like the World Trade Organization. So we are very much dependent on the world economy, and the picture doesn't look bright, of course. I think we are now a predicted predicted -6% decline in economic growth, but it's still uncertain. It's more or less an average, the European average. For us, it's important not only, let's say, how quickly the European economy will recover, but also how quickly the United States will recover as a very important trading partner, and of course China. And having said that, it is also very important to look at the US-China trade deal and how the relations between these two countries will develop. We live very much in an interdependent world where our economic ties are linked to each other. And as you know, also here the debate is about decoupling, whether you could untie the economies and work along different kind of economies, more independent. I think what we have learned from the crisis also in the Netherlands is that we are in certain strategic sectors too much dependent on the outside world. So for instance, on medicine, on masks, for instance, that we didn't have and that we had to import, ventilators and medical equipment. So I think the discussion started now whether in some areas we should become more independent. It doesn't mean that the Netherlands has to have it all by itself, but in a European frame or together with the United States, we want to make arrangements on that. I think some sectors have been hit tremendously. I mentioned already the airline sector, of course, and KLM. Other sectors are coping. I hope that, for instance, agriculture also has the possibility to almost reinvent itself by becoming even more smarter and more environmental friendly, because that's another challenge that we have. Tourism sector has been hit tremendously, of course, but you'll see that many Dutch citizens now, with the holidays coming, the summer holidays, prefer to stay in the Netherlands, so that could give a boost. Then there is, and that's the last remark that I would like to say, I think also the big difference with the United States is that we have a strong social support system in place. And we have, the government has made arrangement with the companies that if they don't dismiss their staff, that they will get a big compensation for not dismissing them and not making them unemployed. So although the number of the unemployment level has slightly risen, it's still relatively okay. And if you become unemployed, there are allowances that you can benefit from, and does not lead immediately to a very serious deterioration of your social economic situation. And I think that's one of the strong systems of a, may I call it a Western European welfare state. I know it's a sensitive issue sometimes also in the United States, and I'm looking forward to discuss that. But I believe in a model where there is some kind of basic support for those people who become the victims of, in this case, an economic crisis or a pandemic, a health crisis. And I think, you know, the Netherlands, we arranged that quite well, if I may say that in a modest way.
Thanks for that. The Netherlands has a reputation of being aware and on cutting edge of climate concerns, climate change issues. That's related to the pandemic, of course, as well. But there's a question about the current climate environmental initiatives that are going on in the Netherlands now. We think of the country as a leader in water management, water mitigation. That's one that the country is very famous for. But what are some of the current conversations and innovations that are going on environmentally in the Netherlands related to climate, related to water?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have to set national targets because that has been agreed upon in the EU. But of course, tackling the climate problems is a challenge for every country in the world, and we have to tackle that on a global scale. Then I think we have our challenges mainly with regard to nitrogen and the fact that especially the intensive agricultural sector produces a lot of nitrogen, which is very detrimental to to our environment. So that's a debate that we actually had very strongly before the outbreak of the pandemic. It means that we have to restructure our agricultural sector. But we also have to look at our transport sector, for instance. I also mentioned the airline sector. So you see a lot of things going on in the economic field, but for also, for instance, in the housing sector, the new houses that are being built are much more built in an environmental friendly way, trying to move away from fossil fuels, dealing with a much more environmental way of providing energy. Old cars, driving on diesel have become much more expensive than newer cars, which are much more environmental friendly. So we have some incentives and disincentives, but it's something we are dealing with. And I think our knowledge in the agricultural field and in the water field can help us with that. For water, I think the challenge is to deal not only with rising sea levels, but also with ensuring that there is enough water available. We again will have probably a very dry summer. So how do you environmental friendly, have water saving techniques? So that is something we are looking at. Water for us also remains an export model. And I know that also in Michigan, there are problems with regard to water, many challenges. We've been looking at it also in preparation of this meeting. And we have some contacts in the area in Michigan. And I know there are plans to have an MOU and there is some kind of initial context. But to be honest, I think we should try to get a step further. I visited in Cleveland the Water Association there, and there is the willingness to work together from both sides, but it remains for some reason difficult to make very explicit what the demand is, what kind of support is needed. So for those of you who are listening and who are, looking for Dutch cooperation on the water field, I'm happy to continue after this meeting the discussion with you on seeing how we can cooperate. Either when it comes to providing technical support, but water management is often also something which has to do with, let's say, ensuring that your institutions are doing the right work and working closely together. Because water is not only something that has to do with agriculture or the environment or with the water management board because of drinking water. It is a holistic approach that you need to tackle the water problem. So I'm happy to continue that discussion, especially with Michigan and the challenges that you have.
Thank you. We appreciate that, to have that discussion with you. A question from a businessman in GR who has built a factory, but production is not complete. And now with COVID, it's in a difficult time now with getting things going, hoping that soon there'll be open borders, open travel, the like. And you mentioned earlier how the Netherlands is trying to cope with this too. So are there ongoing discussions with businesses and the government in the Netherlands about which businesses are safe and can open, and how does that process work?
You mean here in the United States or in the Netherlands?
In the Netherlands.
Yeah, I think in the Netherlands, we continue to gradually open, but people have to take into account the health restrictions, whether it's mouth mask, whether it's 1.5 meter distance and things like that. But I understand that for doing business between our two countries, the travel ban is very important. We've had a few requests from both sides, from Americans who said, I need to go to my factory in the Netherlands because they need my support, and the other way around. Dutch people who say, listen, I need to come to the United States because, well, I fully understand that, of course. And we've made the pitch to our foreign ministry and to our authorities. But the first round of opening up has been done in a European frame, also because of the health situation. And if you look at the United States, flattening the curve, unfortunately, is a bit slower than is currently taking place in Europe. That doesn't give any guarantee about a second spike in Europe or here. I don't hope so. But for the time being, our authorities decided to have the travel ban lifting restricted to the European. I hope that for the American side, it can follow. We are now looking at opening up for specific visa. So for instance, students that have to follow a fellowship here in the United States, they get a special visa. That is important, I think, for that category. You have, for instance, teachers at international schools who cannot come in as well, but they will get a special visa, and then they might be allowed to get in. So we are looking at specific groups, and hopefully we will be able to gradually expand those specific groups for businessmen as well.
That's great. Yeah, related question. What is required of a tourist visitor coming to the Netherlands regarding being COVID safe? I don't think, it doesn't sound like just regular tourist visas or visitors are open now.
No.
What does that process look like for the future?
So yeah, well, for currently, so there is still the travel ban. So tourists are not being allowed, are not allowed in Europe, any other way around. The people who arrive in the Netherlands are being asked to maintain the self-quarantine now of 2 weeks, the self-quarantine. That's one thing. And yeah, for the rest, follow the instructions of the local authorities. So that means, for instance, well, you're obliged to wear a mouth mask in public transport, but also if you feel ill and sick, you know, don't go out, consult your doctor, take a test and things like that. So these are all the regular things. But if you, for some reason or another, for instance, we have had one case, a few cases of humanitarian cases. And to give you one example, there was a Dutch student who all of a sudden became very, very ill, life-threatening, had to be taken into hospital. And then the parents asked whether they could visit her. And we discussed with the State Department here, and that was allowed. That was an exemption based on humanitarian case. And then, you know, for them, it applies the self-quarantine rule and things like that. And the other way around would be the same.
Ambassador, thank you very much. Thanks for this conversation. Great questions we've had, and we really appreciate the introduction that you gave to yourself and the Netherlands, and best wishes to you and your work and your country. We really hope we can see you in real time before too long to visit our great part of the country. And let's make sure we keep in touch on the issues that we talked about during this conversation and others.
Well, thank you very much for organizing this. It was a great pleasure. And as you said, I really hope and I promise that as soon as we are allowed to travel, I'll come your way and we'll meet in person.
That would be marvelous. And we likewise, you noticed you had a number of questions about people eager to visit the Netherlands again. And I certainly am too. This picture right here behind me is of Groningen, where my mother was born. And we are eager to get back there again and visit the country that is important to us and we love so well. So thank you for your time with us. We also want you, those who are listening, to remember about the NAF. We appreciate their cooperation on this production, and membership at thenaf.org. Membership at thenaf.org is a way that you can find out more information about the emerging chapter here in West Michigan and about the NAF in general across the country. We'll archive this program so you'll be able to see it, and you'll be able to tell others about Ambassador Haspels' words to us and his introduction to us. So you can go back to our YouTube channel and refer people back to it. That would be YouTube, and just type in World Michigan and you'll find it. And when you're there, we hope that you will subscribe to our channel as well. Thanks for being with us. We will be back with you later this month when we partner with our colleagues in Columbus, Ohio, the World Affairs Council there, on a presentation on COVID and immigration and agriculture. That is on June 25. So go to worldmichigan.org and check that out. So Ambassador, thank you. Thank you to your great team, Tyrone in Chicago, the Chicago Consulate, Paul Hula, the Honorary Consul in Grand Rapids. We appreciate our contacts with you and the good work that you do.